In this video, we unravel the disturbing and deeply tragic case of Hannah Proctor, a 33-year-old woman whose life was slowly unraveled by the very people she trusted most. In Harrodsburg, Kentucky, lives Hannah Proctor. She worked part-time at a local pharmacy. Quiet days behind the counter, polite smiles, always asking how folks were holding up. At home, though, things were different. Behind that modest trailer door sat a life unraveling thread by thread. Her husband, Russell Proctor, mid-30s, stocky, unpredictable, wasn't always cruel. There was a time he made her laugh, brought her flowers, sat beside her in church and squeezed her hand during prayers. They met in recovery, both battling demons. He quoted scripture, said he wanted to be a better man, promised he'd never raise his voice, never raise his hand. But promises fade, and Russell changed. Then came the rage. Doors slammed, phones smashed. Once, he ripped her Bible in half after accusing her of betraying God by wearing lipstick to church. Neighbors heard shouting, but no one called the cops. Not in Harrodsburg, not unless bones break. And then there was his mother, Carolyn Proctor, mid-60s, reserved in public but unrelenting behind closed doors. She wore her faith like armor and used it like a blade, quoting scripture to justify control, justifying abuse as discipline, saying things like, God put the man at the head of the home. If a woman strays, her punishment is just. Better a dead wife than a disobedient one. She hovered over her son like a shadow, whispering poison into his ears, feeding his paranoia, fanning the flames of his insecurity. She didn't just enable Russell, she weaponized him. To Carolyn, Hannah was a stain, a woman with a past, a woman who had dirt in her spirit. And as the cracks in Hannah and Russell's marriage deepened, Carolyn made it clear, either Hannah submits or God will take care of her. By the fall of 2023, Hannah had begun to emotionally disconnect. The bruises, the isolation, the accusations, the religious manipulation, it was too much. So when an old flame messaged her, a man she once loved, a man from another lifetime, it was like a breath of air after years underwater. He listened, spoke to her gently, made her feel like she was more than someone's punching bag, more than someone's sin. One thing led to another, a meeting, then two, a moment of passion born out of loneliness, confusion, and desperate hunger to feel human again. Weeks passed, then nausea. Then a missed period. She took the test alone. 2 lines, pregnant. It wasn't Russell's. She knew, and the fear set in. But oddly, so did hope. Maybe this child was her second chance. Maybe this was the excuse she needed to finally leave Russell for good. She began writing in a private journal, looking at apartments online, quietly stashing money in a hidden envelope tucked behind a picture frame. She hadn't told her old flame yet. She wasn't sure how. But she planned to. She was ready to fight for her freedom. But the mistake? She didn't hide her phone well enough. One night, barefoot in the kitchen, stirring pasta while Russell sat brooding at the table, she heard a shift in the air. He had her phone in his hand, frozen, silent, his eyes scanning, and then he stopped. One message, just 2 words. He's yours. That was all it took. His hand clenched. His face drained of color. He didn't yell. He didn't throw the phone. He just walked out, got in his car, drove straight to his mother's house. And what happened next would set the stage for something so twisted, so unholy, that not even the darkest corners of scripture could justify it. Because now it wasn't just about betrayal. It was about vengeance, about shame, about cleansing the bloodline. And in their eyes, Hannah wasn't just a wife anymore. She was an offense, one that needed to be punished in the most excruciating way imaginable. That night, Russell didn't explode. No shouting, no shattered plates, no slamming fists through drywall. He just stood in the hallway, staring at her, and for the first time in a long time, he smiled. But it wasn't warmth behind it. It was stillness, cold, calculated, something unnatural. Hannah felt it before he even spoke. That primal kind of fear, like the moment a deer locks eyes with a predator and knows, the chase is over. He stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, And when he finally opened his mouth, his voice wasn't loud. It wasn't trembling. It wasn't even angry. It was steady, level, dead calm. He said, "We need to talk about the baby." She didn't answer. Couldn't. Her breath caught in her throat. Her body screamed for her to run, but her feet betrayed her. He leaned in, eyes locked on hers, close enough for her to feel the heat of his breath as he whispered, "God sees everything, and so do I." Then he turned, walked into the bedroom, closed the door behind him. Not a single word for the rest of the night. But Hannah didn't sleep. She sat curled on the couch, blanket wrapped around her shoulders like armor, eyes flicking toward the door every few minutes, waiting for it to swing open. But it never did. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, only silence. But it was the kind of silence that pulses, that presses down on your chest like a weight you can't shake. Somewhere deep in her gut, Hannah knew. This wasn't over. Whatever Russell was thinking, whatever he was planning, it had already begun. The morning after Russell found the message, "He's yours," everything changed. Gone was the anxious man pacing through the kitchen or yelling at the television. Now he was methodical, polite, measured. And that was far more terrifying. He started with words, always words. But not the kind that shouted, not fists, not bruises, just steady whispers meant to unravel her from the inside out. "You know what they'll say about you? No one's going to believe you. You broke your vows, Hannah. You broke God." Each phrase was a needle, not loud but sharp enough to puncture. And then came the guilt, the slow, crawling guilt his mother helped inject. Strict, stiff-backed, always dressed in dark dresses, always quoting scripture, but never the ones about grace or forgiveness. She stared at Hannah like she was already a ghost. "You brought shame into my son's home," she hissed, voice lined with disgust. "A woman who opens her legs outside her marriage doesn't deserve a blessing. She deserves fire." Hannah tried to leave that day. She packed a bag, grabbed her keys, called her sister from the bathroom with shaking hands. But before she could get to the door, Deborah blocked her. And she didn't scream. She didn't grab. She just put her hand on Hannah's stomach, pressed down, hard. "You don't get to walk away, not until the sin is washed clean." What followed was weeks of isolation, not chains, not locked doors, just a prison built from fear and silence. They cut her off from everyone. Phone calls stopped going through. Her sister's texts went unanswered. Neighbors were told she'd gone away to work on her marriage. Inside that trailer, Hannah became invisible. Meals were brought to her. Russell wouldn't let her out without Deborah watching. And when she spoke, they watched her mouth, not her eyes, like her words didn't matter, only how she delivered them. Meanwhile, Russell was busy. On his laptop, he wasn't looking at job applications. He wasn't looking at baby names. He was searching for something else. How to clean the inside of the body. How much bleach is lethal if swallowed? How to make a death look like a seizure. He bought bottles of industrial cleaner. The receipts were there, time-stamped. So was the footage. Grainy video of him at a gas station, buying bleach, gloves, and what looked like a small funnel. He smiled at the cashier, even made a joke about spring cleaning. No one thought twice. Then came the night. Russell told Hannah he wanted to talk, said they needed to start over, said he forgave her. He handed her a drink. She asked what it was. He said it was homemade. A cleansing tea, he smiled. Said it would help them both forget the past. She hesitated, but the stare from Deborah, standing in the corner like a warden, made her hand move faster than her brain. She drank. At first, nothing. Then came the burning. A searing heat down her throat. A scream choked off by agony. She dropped to her knees, clawing at her neck, coughing foam, eyes bulging, trying to breathe, trying to stand, trying to understand what was happening. At 9:12 p.m., Russell made the 911 call. His voice was calm. "My wife, she just collapsed." "No, I didn't see anything. She was acting strange. Then she dropped." Yes, I'll stay on the line." He never mentioned bleach, never mentioned the argument, never mentioned the screaming. When paramedics arrived, they found Hannah curled in the fetal position on the floor. Her mouth was blistered, her lips discolored. The smell of chemicals filled the air. She was still breathing, barely. But by the time they reached the hospital, her pulse was gone. The autopsy confirmed what her body had already screamed in silence. Her esophagus was burned beyond recognition. The lining of her stomach was corroded. But it wasn't just bleach. There were signs of force, pressure, bruises on her arms, around her jaw, and traces of detergent, liquid soap mixed with ammonia. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. She hadn't sipped the wrong bottle in the dark. She'd been forced to drink it, held down, cleansed. The final insult? They buried her in a dress Deborah chose, pure white, as if pretending she'd been washed clean. But justice wouldn't stay buried long, because what Russell and his mother didn't know was that someone had been watching, and soon that someone would come forward. The truth wasn't just tragic, it was premeditated, it was ritual, it was murder. Take a moment, breathe. I know this story's heavy, it's not easy to hear, and it's even harder to imagine. A woman trapped in her own home, betrayed by the man who once promised to protect her, and poisoned under the pretense of forgiveness. This is the kind of case that leaves a mark, not just on those who knew her, but on anyone who hears it. Because it's not just about bleach or browser searches, it's about control, it's about silence. It's about how far someone will go when they feel ownership over another person's life and body. And maybe it's about how the most dangerous monsters aren't the ones who rage, but the ones who smile while they hurt you. If you've made it this far into the video, you already understand how important this is. Not just as a story, but as a reminder of how hidden abuse can be and how deeply it can dig itself into someone's life. This case, it deserves to be heard, not buried, not softened, not forgotten. So here's where you come in. If you're watching right now, pause for just a second and tap that like button. It might seem small, but it helps push this story out into the world where it can't be ignored. And in the comments, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? What do you think justice looks like in a case like this? This isn't just content, it's a conversation, and your voice matters in it. Because when we talk about stories like Hannah's, we're doing more than listening. We're making sure it never happens in silence again. Somewhere out there, someone might be living a version of Hannah's life right now, feeling trapped, helpless, alone. Maybe they'll see this video. Maybe your comment will be the one that makes them realize they're not crazy, they're not weak, they're not invisible. So be the voice. Light the signal. Now, back to the truth that still hasn't fully unraveled. Because what Russell and Deborah did next only deepened the horror. At first, police were willing to consider the possibility that Hannah's death was accidental. Maybe she'd mixed something up. Maybe there was a tragic misunderstanding. But then they met Russell. He didn't cry, didn't tremble, didn't ask to see her body. He spoke in cold, shallow terms, brief answers, clipped sentences, almost rehearsed, not grief, not shock, something else. And when the autopsy report came back, it changed everything. There was no doubt. Bleach had been ingested. Not a trace, not a taste, a volume, enough to destroy tissue, collapse her airways, and rupture her esophagus. This wasn't ingestion, this was internal warfare, and it was deliberate. But it wasn't just the autopsy that told the truth. It was the trail Hannah had left behind, quietly, carefully, over weeks. A mosaic of pain laid out in text to her sister, browser tabs left open, unsent messages sitting in drafts, a hidden cry for help. Detectives began to stitch it together. She'd been reaching out, researching domestic violence shelters, asking questions on forums under fake names, Googling things like how to leave abusive husbands safely and can bleach kill you if swallowed. Then came the voicemail. Left for her sister at 8:42 p.m., the night before she died. If anything happens to me, it was Russell. Please don't let them blame me. It hit like a thunderclap. Her voice, frantic, shaky, out of breath. In the background, a male voice faintly calling her name. The call ended abruptly. That message changed the tone of everything. The silence wasn't just eerie, it was violent. The police brought Russell in for questioning. His answers were hollow, robotic. Claimed she had mental health problems, said she was hysterical, insisted she drank the bleach herself in some kind of emotional breakdown, a lie that dissolved the moment they reviewed the EMS report. She couldn't speak when they found her. Her throat was chemically scorched. She hadn't spoken a word. She had screamed in silence. And then came Deborah, Russell's mother. At first, she stood firm, Bible in hand, calm and cold, spouting verses about sin and shame. But pressure has a way of prying loose the edges, and under enough of it, Deborah cracked. She told detectives she believed Hannah was infected with corruption, said she was tempted by another man, and had brought shame into their house. She didn't flinch as she said it. She wasn't horrified. She was proud. This was, to her, divine justice. And then came the most disturbing truth of all. It wasn't just Russell's plan. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act driven by jealousy. It was orchestrated, a cleansing, a ritual almost, a decision made between mother and son. Premeditated, cold, done under the belief they were restoring honor to the family. That Hannah had to be purged. Russell had done the act, but his mother was the architect. Together they'd isolated her, monitored her phone, disconnected her from friends, replaced her world with fear and faith twisted into something perverse. She was a prisoner in her own home, a target in her own marriage, and a victim of two people who claimed to love her while slowly planning her erasure. They thought they could bury her story, but Hannah had already started telling it, and now it was too loud to ignore. The courtroom was cold, heavy with silence, as the verdict was read. Russell Proctor sat without reaction, no twitch, no flinch, as if he already knew, as if he'd resigned himself to the outcome long before the jury had reached it. Guilty on all counts: premeditated murder, aggravated assault, tampering with evidence. The list went on, but the sentence was short. Life in prison, no parole, no escape. A living mausoleum for a man who buried his conscience long before he buried his wife. Deborah Proctor, seated just feet away from her son, heard her own sentence shortly after. Conspiracy to commit murder. Accessory before the fact. Her courtroom mask cracked only once, when the judge called her ideology a weapon of hate dressed as holiness. Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. She just closed her eyes as if the judgment of man was nothing compared to the one she imagined awaited her in the next life. Outside the courthouse, the community stood frozen. Harrodsburg wasn't supposed to be a place where things like this happened. Small-town people, God-fearing people, people who knew their neighbors and trusted their pastors. But Hannah's death tore something open, a wound too public to stitch up quietly. Vigils were held, candles lit along sidewalks, her name written in sidewalk chalk near the park where she used to walk her dog. Her sister, trembling but defiant, took to the podium outside the courthouse steps. My sister didn't die in silence. Her voice was just delayed. But now, it's louder than ever. The family began speaking out, on local news, social media, anywhere they could, not just to talk about Hannah, but to talk about what wasn't seen, what was overlooked, what was explained away, the isolation, the way Russell slowly chipped away at her circle, convincing her friends she needed space, telling her family she was moody, unstable, the control masked as concern, the manipulation justified by scripture, the way Deborah twisted religion into a leash, branding Hannah's independence as sin and her pregnancy as a curse. Red flags weren't missed. They were ignored. Because Russell said the right words. Because Deborah wrapped her venom in verses. Because people assumed no one that polite, that godly, could possibly do something that evil. But they did. And Hannah paid for their mask with her life. She didn't die because she cheated. She didn't die because she strayed. She died because she tried to reclaim her life in a house where autonomy was blasphemy. She died because she dared to make a decision for herself in a system that demanded her silence. She died trying to escape, not just a man, but a doctrine that fed his rage. Her crime, wanting to be free, and now that smile on the video call, frozen forever. means something entirely different. It was her final act of defiance, her last attempt to feel something good, even briefly, in a life she was planning to leave behind. But no one was there to answer. No one saw the storm behind her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the fear behind her teeth as she smiled, until it was too late. The image still haunts her sister, still plays in her mind on repeat. That frozen frame, a woman trying to hold on to hope with the very last thread she had left. Russell thought he erased her, thought he'd swallowed the evidence in bleach and scripture. But Hannah speaks louder now than ever before. Not through screams, not through court transcripts, but through the thousands of women who've seen her story and whispered to themselves, "That could have been me." Her voice now lives in every shelter hotline that rings, every friend who pushes a little harder to check in, every mother who teaches her daughter that love should never hurt, that faith should never chain, that control is not care, and silence is not peace. Justice doesn't bring her back, but it does echo. And if you're listening now, really listening, then maybe, just maybe, Hannah's story didn't end in that trailer. Maybe it started something much bigger.